I wonder what the difference would be if I recorded on the cloud. Maybe I'll try that sometime. We are in Acts chapter 21. The glasses. And particularly, or specifically rather, we are on this third journey at the end here. So Paul has made his way back to Jerusalem. He just arrived after visiting the disciples in Tyre and Ptolemais, and then Caesarea, and now Jerusalem. So the narrative has slowed down. I don't know if you've noticed it, but Paul began his first missionary journey in 13, I think, southern Galatia by way of Cyprus. We are in 21. That's a period of about 6 or 7 years, which Luke covers in about 7 or 8 chapters. There's 8 chapters to go, 7.5 chapters to go. So he will spend as much time, narrative space, on what happens in Jerusalem and then on the way to Rome and in Rome as he did on all 3 of the missionary journeys combined. So if you wonder about Luke's priorities, let that sink in. The events, what happens in Jerusalem, and then on the way to Rome, and then in Rome, is critical to the story of Acts. How do we know that it's critical? Because Luke is going to spend 1/4 of the book chronicling it. So if you remember Jesus' statement in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, kind of the thematic statement of Acts, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth, the ends of the earth. First of all, the you that he's talking to, they will not in Acts be witnesses to the uttermost parts of the earth. They will be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. Someone who was not even present, but who will be affected by the narrative and who was not brought to Christ through the ministry of any of these people. Remember, Paul was converted by direct revelation, not through the work of any of the apostles. He will be the one that's responsible for carrying the gospel to the uttermost parts of the earth, which in Acts means Rome. And he will do so kind of against his will, involuntarily. He will do so because he's going to demand to go to Rome to keep himself from getting killed by the Jews. So that last part of Jesus' statement, there's just scratch the surface in any of this stuff, and there's more to the story, right? And when you go back to Acts 1:8, there's a lot hiding underneath that verse. Jesus made this summary statement. The you of the disciples is them and other disciples who will be witnesses. The uttermost parts of the earth is really Rome in Luke's narrative, and Luke is the one writing it. And the man who takes it to Rome will not be the result of a planned ministry, but it will be an ad hoc, on the spur of the moment, urgent necessity that he appeal to Caesar so he cannot be taken back to Jerusalem, where he was almost killed just before. That's coming up right now.
Isn't this the way God always works, though? He takes the smallest element that he could possibly, a real small element, and it blows it up into something extraordinary, something that was weak, extraordinary, something that was not supposed to be anybody, and makes them into something.
Yeah, and always in an unpredictable manner. And we always think we can predict it, or we know what's going on. We know what he's doing. And the more I get into this, the more I think, not usually. He's a multitasker. Even in that verse, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. There's no linear progression there. You can't use that as a template and predict anything about the way this is going to unfold. The ministry to the Samaritans was an accident of history, a result of persecution by a guy who's going to become a Christian in just a little bit. And then the ministry across this territory here, Cilicia, which is not in Acts, but then Galatia, Asia, Macedonia, and Achaia. That was all, you're not going to see that in Acts 1:8. Or predict how that was going to happen, or even who would do it, which Jesus did a lot as well. He said very little in a summary fashion, and then you had to watch it unfold, and you only understood it after the fact. And it's after the fact that you could see the genius of it. And it's genius precisely because the lines look like that. They don't go in a straight line. You know, here's all the journeys. We'll go back to this in just a second. That's the way God works. God works in squiggly lines of different colors. Those straight lines on this. I mean, this is a little bit straight right here, but that's guesswork too, right? Why this route? Well, because that's where the coasting vessels were. That's why, you know, why this route? Because that's where the coasting vessels were. Why did he go straight across the Mediterranean here? Well, because he happened to pick up a ship that was going to Phoenicia. Otherwise, he was going to have to take coasting vessels all the way. You know, that's why this stuff happens. So, yeah, no straight lines here. We'll go back and visit this again in 1 second.
And then they talked everywhere they were.
And that often didn't go very well. They kicked out of synagogues and near riots, which is coming up. You know, did you just raise your hand?
Well, you made the comment about the apostles staying in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, referring to the 12. And I was just wondering about the traditional death places. Some guy in India, Africa. John was in Patmos.
Yeah, we're going to get to actually 2 of those here, Peter and James, hopefully today. Yeah, the church traditions have fairly substantial histories of what happened to these people. And I think generally they're to be believed. It's false that they just made stuff up, especially since a lot of the times they're not particularly grandiose deaths like James's, which we'll get to. So usually when you make stuff up, you're grandiose in some manner. You know, that's why I highlight this stuff in Acts. You know, when Paul, the great apostle, has the amphitheater of Ephesians, this thing holds 25,000 people, and he wants to get up and speak, but the Asiarchs, the leaders, the Ephesian leaders of the city and of Asia, convince him not to. Said, no, don't do that. Well, all the readers want him to get up there is because of a proclamation to 25,000, however many people are there, 25,000. But it doesn't happen. You know, the town clerk just simply gets up and, you know, he does the, what was it? Well, let's forget the movies. He does the nothing to see here, everybody go home kind of thing, Wild West, you know, there's going to be a vigilante mob and then the sheriff gets up, you know, Matt Dillon or somebody and talks them down from it and then they all just disperse and everybody goes home.
Paul's story is also really interesting. He's hit by a light.
Got all,
I mean, that's grandiose.
and none of it, but he's clueless. That's the part.
Right.
Who are you? What do you want me to do? I'll tell you later. That's the vision. We're going to find out that in a little bit as well. Who are you, Lord? I am Jesus of Nazareth. Paul is going to tell this when he tells us of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. Arise, go into the city, and I'll tell you what to do. I'm not going to tell you how I'm going to tell you what to do. You're going to meet a guy, you know, and he'll tell you something from, you know, because that's happening at the same time. Ananias is getting visions while Paul's getting visions, and these 2 people are going to collide because they both sort of get simultaneous visions. Anyway, that's more it. We got my fault here. It's not even Brian's fault this time. Sidetracked off. That's not an invitation.
It will be my fault later.
So back here, you know, I made this thing about the history of redemption a number of weeks ago. And apparently some people liked it and they asked if I could give it to, I think you did, give you this list. So I'm going to do this talk at another church in a few weeks. And I'm going to use this as the beginning of my talk. I kind of redid it a little bit.
Did the website thing work out, or do you want me to read what's on there since you changed it?
This is the one, this is Acts. And yes, I have changed them. I change them every week. I would also like the one that I'm going to do. I would like to piggyback off the church. If they can download that set while I'm speaking, they don't have to, they can just follow along.
Well, I already
Maybe-
noted those things that you sent me, so if you want to change. just
Okay.
send it.
And maybe we can even do the code thing where they can just, like at a restaurant menu kind of thing. Do you know how to do that? Okay. And so then they just, they go to the website. How would they do that? No, they can't do that. Because they'd have their own, they'll never mind, but whatever, we'll figure it out later. So huh?
Have you put a push report?
Yeah, that's true. All right. We'll talk about it. Okay, anyway, here's here's that ad hoc kind of made up, so I just kind of went through chronologically some transformative moments in the history of redemption. And the talk that I'm going to give on the 22nd in the other church is centered around those four in yellow. Because it's those four, the consequences of those four are going to converge together to produce the world in which this could be so successful or even happen at all. And that's my point. But what's interesting about it, because we have the Hellenistic synagogues that were a result of the exiles, the two exiles. You have the Roman roads and sea-going transportation routes. You have the Hellenism of the culture and the Greek language and the Roman peace with Roman colonies. You have a Roman citizen right in the middle of it, Paul, who's also a Hellenistic Jew, who's prepared to believe in the resurrection of Jesus because he's a Pharisee, and Pharisees believe in the resurrection. That's of the dead. That's their core belief. So it all converges in a moment of time to produce the world just in time. It's the just in time world in which the Hellenistic advance can happen. And it's just an extraordinary, it's spread across the pages of Acts and Luke a little bit, but it's an extraordinary historical phenomenon. By any measure, from a historical standpoint, it's an extraordinary phenomenon. Go ahead.
Paul later calls it when the fullness of time has come.
He's aware.
Pardon?
Nothing. Go ahead.
Yeah. Paul says it this way, when the fullness of time had come. Isn't that in Colossians? Galatians 4:4.
Chapter 2. Chapter 2, I think. Galatians 2.
Galatians 2? Was there 4:4 on mine? But I don't know.
Maybe probably said it once.
Pardon?
Nothing.
Yeah. I'm trying to find it here. He puts it in Ezra. But when the fullness of time came, God sent forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who are under the law, that we might receive the adoption of the son. That is in 4:4, by the way.
Yeah, I was thinking of Paul's statement about himself.
Yeah. He's saying all these things have been in motion since the beginning of
Yes.
time to come together at a specific time for Christ to come, and the conditions are right and ready for childbirth, I think is just to reveal this thing he's going to call the gospel.
I agree with that. And I think he was self-aware. I think it was part of the exclamation in Romans 11, the depth of both the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and unfathomable his ways. He's processing how it is that the God brought about the redemption of the Gentiles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a part of what he's getting
Any
at.
other time it would have failed. If it came before or later, it would have failed. But here is the exact time that it fits in.
Yeah, or he would have to do it. He would have done it in a different way.
Yeah.
He didn't have to do anything, but he did it. He did it this way because he prepared the world this way. That's how I think of it. So anyway, these four events, only two of which are in the Bible. The two exiles, I guess you could say the Greek, Persia, Greece, and Rome are in Daniel. But notice how the historical side, the historical timeline, every one of these historical events have a spiritual reality to them. And I just went through and kind of listed out. But for these four events together, converging together, produced the world in which there was a mission to the Gentiles. So this is the physical side, this is the historical side, and this is the, I don't know what you want to call it, transcendent side. Not a big fan of the word spiritual because it has a nebulous meaning. Did I irritate Sally? Oh, okay.
The answer is yes.
Guilt ridden all guilt motivated all the time. I'm glad I asked that because it bothered me the whole week. She's so mad at me. What did I do?
Don't worry.
Could be that too. Okay, so yeah, then I keep working on this as well. This is the version I'm going to use on the 22nd. So all of the events of Acts, beginning with this first journey, take place from here. And we are, so right around 49, 50, and we are now at about 56. So Acts 13 through 20, 21 is only a matter of 6 or 7 years, 5 of which he spent in Ephesus and Corinth, at least 5 of which. And now we will spend the rest of the book working our way from 56 AD to about 62 AD. So he will spend 7 or 8 chapters on the last 4 years or so. Okay, with all of that, it's 9:43. Great. Let's motor right along and get something done.
Was that my fault?
No, it's me. I keep summarizing. I keep rethinking these things because I'm doing this thing on the 22nd. And then as I learn, I find kind of a different way of encapsulating it that seems to make more sense to me. And I keep, yep, I keep working it over in my head. Yeah. It's a sickness. I'll lay there. I'll wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, go to the bathroom. I sit here and think about it. Sit there and think about it in bed. And it just works over in my head over and over and over again. Yeah. Okay, so they're in Jerusalem now in verse 17. And things go nuts. After we arrive, we're in a we section, which means Luke is present. We arrived in Jerusalem. The brethren received us gladly. And the following day, Paul went in with us, so Luke is present, to James, and all the leaders were present. All the elders were present. So you already know who was the leader of the church. So this late date, within 56, within 10 years of the Jewish revolt, James is still the leader of James, the brother of Jesus, is still the leader of the church in Jerusalem. Interestingly, he wrote a letter to the Hellenistic Jews of the dispersion, which is fascinating. Because remember, the letter of James, bondservant of Jesus Christ, not brother, bondservant of Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes dispersed abroad, I think is the way that it says. And I don't remember if he's the one that lists it's a great statement of exactly what I'm talking about. James addressing this world that exists because of the convergence of what we just talked about. And that he can do it and address all of them in the same language, Greek, which isn't even his native language. After he had greeted them, Paul, he began to relate one by one the things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. So he's going to summarize some number of years of ministry. And when they heard it, they began glorifying God, and everything seems great. This is wonderful. So much better than the last time he was in Jerusalem, which we'll get to. They, not James, they said to him, so you almost picture James sitting down and like he did in the council in 15. He didn't speak till the very end. He let things unfold. And then he got up to make a final judgment. Brethren, it's my judgment that we don't trouble those among the Gentiles who are turning to God, but that we write to them about these 4 things. Guess what they're about to summarize? James's advice. They said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews in Palestine of those who have believed, and they're all zealous for the law. And they have been told about you that you are teaching all the Jews who are among the Gentiles, the Hellenistic Jews, to forsake Moses, because Paul's been going to these Hellenistic synagogues, telling them not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. There's no evidence of that in any of his letters. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. So they've heard that Paul's coming probably, and they're going, oh boy, what are we going to do about this? They're sweating it out in Jerusalem. So the first thing they bring up, before you go anywhere, Paul, you need to be aware of the situation on the ground, because it's not very different from what you encountered in the Hellenistic synagogues, and a little bit worse. Let's see. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. Therefore, do this that we, the whole group of elders, tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. They shall remain nameless. In fact, they shall remain anonymous even to the extent that we don't know that they're Christians. Because these people are worshiping probably at the temple in traditional devout Jewish ways. So they're mingled together, they're sort of mingled together. The Jews in Jerusalem, the Christians in Jerusalem never separated themselves from the Jews or its orthodoxy. It's all mingled. It's like when you first saw Peter at the beginning of the book, they would go up to the temple and pray, and they would preach the gospel at the temple. Well, now it's maybe the same thing. It's just a different group of people. That's the way they would have raised these believers. So it's all kind of, I think it's all kind of mingled together, which is okay, except it's going to present problems, and we're about to encounter them. We have these 4 men who are under a vow. Take them and purify yourself along with them. Pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. This is Jewish code. And all will know that there is nothing to the things which they have been told about you, but that you yourself also walk orderly, keeping the law, from which you see no dissent by Paul. But concerning the Gentiles who have believed, we wrote, having decided that they should abstain from, and then they list James's decree from 15, abstain from meat sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from fornication. Paul took the men, and the next day, purifying himself along with them, went into the temple, giving notice of the completion of the days of purification until the sacrifice was offered for each one of them. So to summarize, I think what they're saying is, look, we know what they're saying about you is not true, and that in fact, you're devout as well, according to the customs. Paul doesn't disagree with that. And I've always maintained that Paul was an Orthodox Jew till the day that he died. Consider the fact that what he's doing right now on behalf, and consider the fact that he himself was under a vow on his second missionary journey, that he ended on a second missionary journey. Where was I? And so they say, look, this is false. Remember where you are. These people are very devout. So if you can just do this and just demonstrate your fidelity and know that we're still abiding by the decree that we gave earlier at the council, that there's no requirement for Gentiles. So your ministry, all of that, we're on board. We're not trying to change any of that. We're not criticizing you because you're not getting the Gentiles to be circumcised. Everything is the same, except you're back in Jerusalem now, and the rules are a little bit different. And the context of the times the life setting is different. This is not the Hellenistic world. So can you just make this accommodation for us? To which he says, sure, I'll do that, no problem. And a lot of people have problems with that because Paul's supposed to say, no, I'm not going to offer sacrifices. I'm not going to demonstrate my fidelity to Moses. Deal with it.
Right now, the book seems to be going in order because he's following his documentation from the travels, and now they're in Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
And so anything that happened prior, talking about Paul already explaining to people, we're not going to ask them to convert. We've already had these discussions in other places
Yeah.
around, so we're still back to, we're not making them do.
Yes. We have been very, what's the word? We have been very careful to abide by the decree that we gave, and we understand the situation with the Gentiles.
We're in the situation of, we still haven't addressed the Jews.
You're in Jerusalem now. It's not the same thing. And you haven't been here for a long time. And all kinds of rumors have been floating around about you. And they're here right now because it's festival time. So there's Jews from all over the place, and they're going to cause trouble. So just demonstrate, if you can just do this for us, knowing that we're not saying anything about doing anything with the Gentiles. If you can just do this for us, maybe it's a powder keg. As witness the events that are about to happen, they confirm exactly what James is worried about. Go ahead, Brian.
There's a portion of scripture, I can't remember where it is, but Paul says, to the Jews, I'll become a Jew, to Gentiles, I'll become a Gentile, for the purpose of preaching the gospel.
That I am all things to all men, so that by any means I might save some.
There you go. That's
Is that
what he's doing
Philippians,
here.
Philippians something? I don't know. You can find it.
Isn't that what he's
We,
doing?
yeah. No. I don't think so. I think I agree with you, but I think in this case right here, James knows Paul is Orthodox. He's a devout Christian Jew or devout Jewish Christian. He's a rabbi. I mean, I'm sorry, a Pharisee. Whereas he's going to say in a very little bit, I am a Pharisee born of Pharisees. It is for the hope of the resurrection of the dead that I'm on trial. Was he just making that up to
That
cause
sets him
trouble?
off right there.
No, he's a Pharisee. He's a Jew. There's every evidence that he never abandoned the customs. Otherwise, if he did, then their accusations would be true or have merit to them. Look, he's abandoned the customs and he's teaching these Jews and these Hellenistic Jews to abandon the customs as well. Paul's not going to come back and say, no, I agree. I have abandoned the customs, but I haven't been advocating that they abandon the customs. They're not going to, that's not the way it is. Paul is, in my view, an Orthodox devout Jew who took the next step, like Stephen did and like Apollos did. He just took the next step in believing in the Messiah, the resurrected Messiah. One more step, Priscilla and Aquila say to Apollos. It's just the smallest thing to move from John the Baptist to Jesus.
So 1 Corinthians 9, 19 through
Oh.
23.
That was off. 1 Corinthians 9, 19 through 23. I am all things to all men, so that by all means I might save some.
So that's how he ran his ministry. He learned to understand other people. It's not easy for him to do.
He just didn't enforce, he didn't enforce Moses on anyone except for himself, probably. That's my own opinion. What would make him a legalist is if he did enforce it on other people. He's also the guy that had Timothy circumcised, by the way, if you remember. That was an accommodation the other way around. That was an accommodation to the Hellenistic Jews that also got him nowhere with them. There was just no pleasing these people. So James is the only apostle mentioned. It implies that the rest of the apostles have moved on in some way to other evangelistic projects. Peter, church tradition strongly indicates universally that Peter ended up in Rome. We know that he went to Corinth because there's going to be a sect for him in the Corinthian church that Paul's going to specifically mention. Some of you are saying, I am of Paul. Some of you are saying, I am of Cephas. So one of Cephas is Peter. So he probably went to Corinth. Everybody seemed to go to Corinth. Paulus went to Corinth as well. But it caused this trouble because you have these stalwarts all there, and then they all kind of do their social caste system, and they separate themselves into these different sectarian groups because that's what Jews did. Actually, that's probably what Greeks did as well, because they're just so class oriented. But then church tradition holds that Peter ended up in Rome about the same time that Paul will, and that Peter was executed about the same time as Paul in Rome, which if it was between 62 and 64, maybe 64, then it was just before the Jewish revolt. Things turned decidedly against the Christians by the emperor in 64, the emperor being Nero at that point, 54 to 68. But this is all peace and quiet right here. We're just a few years away from the complete and total destruction of the temple, Jerusalem, and all of Palestine. They will wipe it out in just in a relatively few years. We'll talk about that at the end, probably, after I learn more about it. So James departed the narrative after what I call the formal welcome of the Gentiles into the church, chapter 15, when James wrote the letter, decreed the letter. I call that the formal admission, the formal welcome of the Gentiles into the church by the mother church in Jerusalem. Let's see. And he had welcomed Paul at that time. So these guys knew each other. There's a discussion in Galatians chapter 2 about some problems that disciples of James gave Paul in Galatia, or was it Antioch? I don't remember. And you can read about that. Maybe we will next week. I want to make some more progress today. But yeah, the situation between James and Paul is complicated. There's just little hints. Like it is with Barnabas as well, because Barnabas, after their squabble, at the beginning of the second missionary journey, Barnabas disappears from the narrative. He's mentioned in the letters, there's no hostility, but he just disappears from the narrative, never to be heard from again. Well, James is back one time. James is back in the narrative here, almost as if nothing has changed since Acts 15. You still have, remember the issue. Peter came back from Cornelius, the centurion in Caesarea, having ate with him. And in spite of the fact, when the Jews in Jerusalem heard that the Gentiles had received the word of God, they said to Peter, you went into uncircumcised men and ate with them. Skipping over this magnificent moment of the Gentiles receiving the word of God. I mean, it's almost like Luke was wanting to pointing out the shocking disconnect that there's this transformative event in the history of redemption, the first conversion of Gentiles in Acts. It's simply pushed aside because Peter went in and ate with those uncircumcision having. That's all they can see. So it's there in 15 when the Jews come down from Jerusalem to Antioch and insist that the Gentiles have to be circumcised and keep the customs of Moses. Paul and Barnabas head back up to Jerusalem, chapter 15. James listens to them argue about it. The Pharisaical side keeps saying, no, we got to make them, we got to circumcise them. You got to make them Jews before you can make them Christians. They have to be proselytes, just like they always have been. Right? You come into the church the same way you came into the covenant before. Proselyte. Everybody's a proselyte to Judaism, period. No exceptions. James rules otherwise. Off we go on the mission. It clears the way. Off we go on the missionary journeys. Now here we are back in Jerusalem. All three times. Yes, all three times in Jerusalem, this issue of circumcision is right at the front, is front and center. And it's James again, and he's dealing with the same problem. He still has these people around who are on edge about this whole Mosaic custom thing. And so now here comes Paul, who brings trouble with him, James knows, everywhere he goes. Because the rumors are everywhere. You don't need the internet for these rumors to get around. So Paul had with him the evidence of the advance of the gospel. We only know of Luke and Trophimus. Trophimus was an Ephesian. We heard about him earlier. Luke, we don't know for sure. He may be the Lucius of Antioch, who was of Cyrene, actually. We pick him up and we drop him off in Philippi on the second journey. We pick him up again in Philippi on the third journey. So did he have some special connection to Philippi? We don't know, but he's there. And since they're delivering the gift from the Gentiles in Macedonia and Achaia to the church in Jerusalem, James, that's why we're here, maybe to deliver this show of solidarity that the brothers, the Gentile brothers want to give to the brothers in Jerusalem. Here's the gift from them. It's not even present. It's not even a part of the narrative. But my guess is there's other disciples that he's brought with him as sort of testimony. When he says, went in and relate one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry, he can point in the room to the representatives of Achaia and Macedonia and wherever else as the evidence. That would be my guess. They have bigger fish to fry, bigger problems on their hands. Maybe they've already heard things. Let's see. So they changed the subject. That's great, Paul. But remember where you are. There's also thousands of Jews who have come to Christ here. And that's the immediate issue. And nothing's changed. So it turns out that there had been a silent, while all this was going on, in Hellenistic territory, while this Hellenistic advance was going on across these provinces up to Macedonia and Achaia, there had also been a sort of Palestinian advance of the gospel that silently happening at the same time. He's talking about thousands. So they made a real ruckus in Jerusalem and in Judea. There's thousands of them. As you walk down the street, you're going to encounter Christians. But they learned how to coexist with the traditional Orthodox Jews. Been told about you that you are teaching all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, and so on and so forth, which Paul never did. For Paul, faith in Jesus Christ was simply the next step. It's a very easy move from traditional Orthodox Judaism to belief in the resurrected Messiah as the fulfillment, in Jesus as the resurrected Messiah and as the fulfillment to so much of the prophetic word.
Could there be a lesson in this as to how we should, how far we should go to satisfy or get along with other faiths?
I don't know. That's a good question. Christianity is an extension of Judaism,
Yes.
but Christianity is not an extension of Islam. So if you know, what kind of common ground is there? What kind of accommodation can be made? And I frankly, as far as religious accommodation, which he was doing here, this was a religious accommodation. There is no religious accommodations with, these are disparate faiths. These faiths are irreconcilably
Opposed.
irreconcilable, right? That doesn't mean they have to be hostile.
Mhm.
You know, they do coexist here in the United States, but mainly because they stay separate. And when they don't stay separate, they end up sort of watering each other down. And there's a lot of that going on as well. But it's an interesting question. I don't know.
Aren't the Orthodox Jews at this time, when Paul's about to be arrested, isn't their belief like Paul was in the beginning? The persecution of Christians?
My guess is that the Christians had satisfied. Remember what started the persecution? Stephen, and specifically his posture towards the temple. The temple comes into play for Jesus, Peter, Stephen, and now Paul. It centers on the temple. And that's going to be the issue in just a minute.
So things really haven't changed that
They had just figured out how to coexist. Yeah, that's what I think happened.
barely, or
Apparently barely. Just under the surface, it was a powder keg waiting to happen.
My neighbor is a Muslim, and I golf with him quite often. And I have come to the conclusion that concerning witnessing to him, I be a servant of God and let God do the convincing in his life. And I think that is a proper way to handle those types of things. Because it is God that's going to make the conversion or make the points. It's not me. God will see to it that his heart, if it's going to be moved, will be moved.
Yeah, there's no reason that you can't coexist until someone decides they're going to be authoritarian. And so far, you know,
In the narrative.
or yeah, I was thinking here, but in the narrative, I mean, Orthodox Judaism in Palestine was authoritarian, right? It was not a democracy. You didn't have a bunch of Greek pagans running around building temples in Palestine. There's a reason for that. The Jews would never have tolerated it. So we're going to get back to the, in just a second, it's going to blow up here in just a second. On the cusp of Paul doing the thing he's asked to do to accommodate the Jews, is not going to turn out that way. Let's see if I get my guess is even the Christians were deeply suspicious of Paul, and not just the non-Christian Jews. They had a bond with the Hellenistic Jews around the empire, and they didn't want to see that destroyed. That's understandable. So he goes and he does this. And I think we can, I got a couple more notes here. So there's no Peter. Okay, now James simply disappears from the narrative again. He's only brought up 3 times in the whole book. He's at the in the upper room at the very beginning, chapter 1. He's at the council, by which time he is probably the leader of the church in Jerusalem in chapter 15. And now in chapter 21, he is still in Jerusalem, and he is still the leader of the church in Jerusalem. They go in to see James and the elders gathered around James. The nameless Jews that have the purification rite disappear completely. We don't know anything. They're just there to basically be the catalyst for what the thing that's about to happen. And then we arrive at 27. Whereas the thing in Ephesus was a comedy, almost it's the closest thing to comedy in the book. There's no comedy value here. When the 7 days were almost over, the Jews from Asia, we were just there in the amphitheater. Upon seeing him in the temple, all those were the Greeks, but he had trouble from the Jews there too. Upon seeing him in the temple, began to stir up all the crowd and laid hands on him, crying out, "Men of Israel, come to our aid. This is the man who preaches to all men everywhere against our people and the law and this place. And besides, he has even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place." For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with him, and they supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple, which he would never do. Trophimus was neither a God-fearer nor a proselyte. He was just a Greek, an Ephesian Greek in a city full of idols, and he was converted and joined Paul.
So they just spit stuff, they don't even have any evidence. Just assume.
Or they're making it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Stephen and Peter.
Exaggerated. We've seen.
Yeah. Yep. You know, it starts, yeah. You know, they just, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there. We don't have a video. Be another great video. Okay, look at this color here. It's the same color that you saw back in, remember this. Remember the uproar in Ephesus. Remember all this, whatever you want to call that color? City was filled with confusion. Some were shouting one thing and some another. This is an Ephesus. Assembly was in confusion. They didn't even know why they were there. They shouted for 2 hours. We're in danger of accused of having a riot. This disorderly gathering. That's 1 chapter ago. At the beginning of the journey, or before the end of the journey, the uproar, the plot by the Jews, foreshadowing in chapter 20. After that uproar, and here we are with lots of red. All the city was provoked. People rushed together. Wait a minute, I missed one. It should be that color too. Taking hold of Paul, they dragged him out of the temple. Immediately the doors were shut. While they were seeking to kill him, a report came up to the commander of the Roman cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion, same language as in Ephesus. At once, he took some soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. And when they saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. So they were going to kill him like they did Stephen. The parallels between Stephen and Paul are countless. Everything's a parallel. I mean, it's just amazing. Stephen got stoned. That's undoubtedly the direction these people were headed with Paul. I wonder if that occurred to Paul as he was getting beaten, going, huh, look where I am. I wonder how this is going to end up for me, right? I mean, only before I was the guy over there holding the post. right? Now I'm the guy that's about to be stoned. At once he took some soldiers, he stopped beating Paul. Then the commander came and took hold of him, ordered him to be bound with 2 chains, and he began asking who he was and what he had done. Can't figure it out. But among the crowd, same language as in Ephesus, some were shouting one thing and some another. And when he could not find out the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought into the barracks. And when he got to the stairs, he was carried away. He was carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the mob. For the multitude of the people kept following them, shouting, "Away with him." Have we ever heard that phrase before? Yeah, what verse is that? Huh. What verse is that? Whoops. John 19, Luke 23:18. Away with this man, says the Jews about Jesus to who? To the Romans. Indeed. Away with him.
It's just that phrase has always been remarkable to me. Away with him, we want Barnabas. The choice of the depraved man will always choose the worst individual in the room.
Good insight, and I would go further. Give us this man who really is an insurrectionist, and
Yeah.
crucify this man who is not an insurrectionist, but we're accusing of being an
Yeah,
insurrectionist.
that's my point right there. The worst man in the room, we want him.
And standing in the middle, trying to stop it all, is the Romans. In the case of Jesus, it's the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate. And in the case of Paul, it's a tribune whose name is going to be, I think, Claudius Lysias.
I got a question, just curious. All this transpired for the advancement of Christianity, but the thing about it is, even in Jesus' time and now with Paul and what's about to transpire, the Jews, the Orthodox Jews are so in tune with the law and the way that they've been raised, but the evidence is so right there in front of them that they just don't see it. As God kind of blocked their sense of knowledge of what's actually transpired. I mean, they didn't even realize when Jesus was walking right in front of them. And now here it is, Paul's preaching the gospel of Jesus, and they're still in that same frame of mind where they're just not putting 2 and 2 together.
I think that based on the evidence of Paul's letters, the answer is yes, because he alluded to as much on more than one occasion.
But I
He
can
talked-
see where the Orthodox Jews are coming from. I mean,
Yeah.
this is going against God himself.
Yes, this is going against 1,400 years of God-ordained tradition that we have writings on. It's completely understandable and even predictable. And Paul knows it, and that's why he's trying to accommodate these people. But they will not be accommodated. Gotta close this out. So here comes the Jews from Asia, which we had a foreshadowing of already 2 chapters ago. The temple comes back into play. Remember also, Jesus was accused of claiming to want to destroy the temple. That's Mark 14, ironically not in Luke. Mark 14, we heard him say, "I will destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days I will rebuild another one made without hands." That's Mark 14. It's also John 19:15. So Jesus was accused of desecrating the temple. Peter was preaching in the temple, which was what caused the soldiers from the temple to go and arrest him and take him to the council. Stephen was accused of blaspheming the temple in Acts chapter 6 and 7. And now Paul is accused of desecrating the temple, Acts chapter 21. So the parallels you don't want to say that Jesus, that Paul's life paralleled that of any particular person. These parallels just flow in and out. But if I was going to pick one person whose life is most like Paul's, I would say it's Stephen's. It's almost as if when Stephen, it's like when Stephen died, the baton dropped. And some time later, after Paul was converted, he came back to that site and he picked up that baton and he said, I'm going to carry this for the rest of my life. And now he's being Stephened on the same accusation that he made against Stephen 20 some odd years earlier. And guess who's going to come in and rescue him? The Romans are. Yeah, or they would have killed him right then and there. We got to stop. Okay, thanks for showing up. Appreciate it. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the feed now.